how you doing, folks? We're gonna record now the second part of the video on the sacrament of reconciliation, penance, or confession.
Indeed.
So in the first video we have recorded and Richard have explained and we have digged about the sacrament and to overcome some of the objections posed by Protestants on why to go to confession. In this video, we're gonna talk more specifically to Catholics. A book written talking about the vision that Saint Catherine of Siena had once. Do you know about anything about this? A vision she had. It was like snowflakes. So she went to Jesus and she saw these snowflakes and she said, "Jesus, my Lord, what is this?" And he said, "Those are the souls that are being condemned to hell right now." And he said, "Lord, we need to pray for the pagans." And then Jesus said, "They are not pagans." "What are they then, Lord?" "They are Christians, Catholics." Why they're going to hell? Because of bad confessions. They go to confession and they hold mortal sins, secret sins. So one of the motivations of this video is to help us to do better confession.
I can speak from personal experience because from a mixture of shame, a bad kind of shame, there's a good and a bad kind, and I might elaborate on in a moment. From a sort of bad kind of shame, for many years when I was going to confession as a teenager and the rest, I came into my faith in like going down a train line. There were all these stops and big stretches in between them and sort of such. And I was meandering around, and sometimes I would fall away and then I would come back. But it was a slow and laborious process. And one of the problems that I introduced for myself was being far too mealy-mouthed in confession. I would be euphemistic. I would allude to sins rather than outright stating them. Especially, of course, as many young men are very embarrassed about sins against the sixth and ninth commandment. You know, you would not say that I had certain thoughts about such and such, or my eyes wandered while, walking down the street. You would just, in my case, say, "Oh, I was lustful." I was like, what does that mean? That could be anything. That could be anything from adultery to just having a small, indecent momentary thought to everything in between. It's incredibly vague. I was angry. What did I do? Did I, punch my mother in the face, or did I, curse slightly under my breath after stubbing my toe? Most priests will kind of intuit, but you shouldn't impose that on them. And there's some priests who, unfortunately, they will not particularly delve deeper. They should, but a lot of them will not, and they will just take whatever is said on the other side of the grill at face value and give you a penance and such and so on. And these are examples of bad confessions. I gave bad confessions for years. Was I sorry for the sins? Mostly. Fully? Probably not. Did I have a firm purpose of amendment? It's debatable. Probably not. Many times I acted in a certain way, maybe got angry, or had a problem with custody of the eyes, custody of the mind, impurity. I would go to confession, and then I would immediately be in the same problem that night or the next morning, or fighting with people, or doing this, or getting drunk, all this sorts of stuff. It made almost no impact. Why? Is it because God doesn't care? No, it's because I wasn't really digging the rocks out of myself. I was being very superficial. And maybe I wasn't lying outright, because there's a difference. You can muddle along, and maybe I can say maybe some of them I received more forgiveness than others. Maybe I got forgiveness, but not a great deal of grace. I don't know. But it wasn't enough. It wasn't tackling the actual sins. It was only when I actually listened to the rules that we have, where you're supposed to say, generally, your condition, because this informs the priest. If you are a very old man who's been married for 50 years, a particular sin might be a lot more shocking or a lot more understandable than if you are a young 16-year-old kid. My age, condition, what I did and how many times I did it, usually starting from the worst sin to the least sin. That's generally the way you do it. It's a good way to do it. It gets the worst thing out of the way. And when I started to say, okay, stop making excuses, don't provide a huge amount of context. Don't provide the context that you think will get you out of finger wagging. So like, yeah, bless you, Father, I've sinned. I committed the sin of anger. Now, this fella cut me off in traffic, so I said all these horrible things, but he was really rude about it. I was like, no. Like, yes, again, it's like, you know, that's one thing. Or, you know, oh, I blasphemed. I confess I took the Lord's name in vain. But I was watching a football match and, you know, Galway lost by 1 point and I screamed the Lord's name in vain at the television. So did I really do a sin? That sort of thing is ridiculous. And in time, when I was looking back on all this, I was like, oh, that was ridiculous. I was trying to cheat God in some sense. It's like, he saw you commit the sins. He knows you committed the sins. You weren't ashamed to commit the sin in the sight of God. Why are you ashamed to say it to the priest who ultimately has very little power over you because he didn't create you and he can't unmake you, unlike God? So why are you ashamed to say it to the priest? I had to keep telling myself, you were not ashamed to do it before God. Why are you ashamed to say it to the priest who can help you? And once I rattled that in my head, I said, okay, now I've got to change it. So I started doing proper confessions and things immediately changed. I physically felt different. Things slowly began to improve. Things began to fall away. Sins began to fall away. Some sins are still there, but they are way fewer and smaller in number and smaller in severity. And the gap between them and confession is shorter and shorter. If it can work on me, it can work on you. You're much better than me. I trust you. So that's the sort of thing. We have to make sure that we are in as good a position going into the confession and coming out of it as we can.
What about the frequency of someone that should go to confession?
Well, if we're to go by the canon law, we have to go to confession once a year. And the ideal time is generally during Lent. Now, unless you happen to be a saint, which if you are, wonderful, congratulations, please pray for me. But if you aren't a saint, you're probably going to have to go at least once a month. Many people, the Pope, for example, goes twice a week. I and many others, we're by about day 9 after confession, we are like a dog with 3 legs, hobbling along. It was like, missing bits. We're all covered in wounds. It's like, oh boy, we've been angry. For me again, pride, anger, and lust. The classic 3 sins of a young man. That you just pick up shrapnel every day, little bit, but it builds up, and you say, oh, I have to go in and I have to get the broken glass pulled out of me, bandaged up, and sent out to continue the fight. So in terms of that, if you commit a mortal sin, you should go to confession as soon as you are able. Ideally, that day or the next day, because God has given you today for your repentance. He has not given you tomorrow for your procrastination, which I believe is the words of St. Augustine. And it's very true. And it's a sin that I have committed. The sin of presumption is something you should also confess in confession. Where it's like, I've committed a sin. It's Tuesday. I got drunk. Confession is Friday. It's like, there's confession tomorrow too. I'll go on Friday. There's like 3 days between then. And the worst thing is like, confession is tomorrow. I'll get drunk again tonight because I'm already in a state of mortal sin. What's the harm? I'll just say I got drunk twice. What's he going to do? Add on another 5 Hail Marys? Let's get the bottles out.
In Brazil, they say you're in hell. Hug the devil.
Yeah, which is exactly. It's insane. That's why we're laughing. It's not that it's funny. It's because it's insane. It's ridiculous. I'm as guilty of it as anybody in the past, and sometimes even now. It's a temptation to fight. It's mocking God, fundamentally. Anybody, God forbid, but anybody can commit a mortal sin, be it anger or impurity or gluttony. These are the typical ones in a heartbeat. in 20 seconds, you can say something unconscionable. And you can work to keep that away, but there's only so much you can do. It's the second sin that I think really gets people. There's an element of despair. You break contact with God, and then the devil goes in and goes, sure, why not? Go, text her, go out and see her again. Go onto this website, have another drink, go to that house party. You're mine anyway. That's the ultimate message. The devil's saying, you're mine anyway. And this is what confession breaks. You're in chains, and you're putting them out before God, who has a hatchet, and he's going to break them. And it's going to be tough, but you have to hold them out, and Christ will break those chains for you. But you have to hold them out. And that's what it is. It's an act of sublime trust. You are going to God. A good confession is going to God and saying, I am wretched and nothing, but you can make me clean and somebody again. And it is absolutely necessary.
And we're finishing off here with the month of July. And the month of July is generally and traditionally held by the Church as the month dedicated to the blood of Christ. And we know the sacrament of confession is tinted. Can you say that? Tinted? Or infused in the blood of Christ.
Yes.
So when you receive the sacrament, the blood of Christ wipes away your soul when you're renewed.
Because it is in fact a second baptism. When we are baptized, the water washes away original sin for infants and original sin and other sins for example, adult converts. But of course, what happens if we wade back into the mud, if we, like a dog returning to its vomit, is the sinner who returns to his sin. How do we return to that state of baptismal innocence? Well, through confession. Now, we've had one baptism for the forgiveness of sins. Unam baptismam. We have one baptism. So what do? Christ pools the precious blood that he shed upon the cross for our sakes into his hands, and he pours them out over us, and he rebaptizes us in his own blood. And that cleanses us. Just as if we are a new convert baptized in water or a child. We regain innocence, in a sense. Now, the wounds remain. They are cleansed and healed, but they remain. And which is why we often, in our insanity and in our fallenness, we rip open those wounds and dirty them again. But Christ, the good surgeon, in his infinite patience, rebinds them again, cleanses them again. This is why it's so important to tell your sins to the priest, because the priest is the doctor. You are badly injured when you are in a state of mortal sin. You are near death, or actually spiritually dead. But the priest examines the wounds. Every sin you tell him is another wound you point out, another circumstance that you tell him how you became injured. And that informs the priest what to give you, how to help you, how to help make you whole again. And that is so important. So when we go to the confessional and we are dead in sin, Christ raises us from the dead. He puts to death the old sinful wretch, and a new creation walks out. And that is the power of a good confession. You become a new creature. The person who committed all those sins, whatever those sins were, however horrible they were, how many decades you were in them, Christ puts those sins out of his mind with an act of will. And they will not be held over your head ever again, provided it's a good confession.
Amazing. And one of the good things we have as Catholics in the Church to help us to keep up with the state of grace is called sacramentals.
Sacramentals.
We're going to be talking about them next week.
Thank you very much.